picture this, right? A 19th century sailor is tied to the main mast of a British naval ship, and his back is just being systematically flayed by a multi-tailed whip.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is a dark image to start with.
Right. Or imagine a jewel-encrusted cat in ancient Egypt being fed the freshly severed tongue of a convicted blasphemer.
Also incredibly grim.
Yeah, these are just horrifying, like incredibly vivid historical scenes. But what if I told you that for decades, people have desperately tried to convince us that these gruesome, hyper-specific moments are the exact reason why we look at a quiet toddler today and casually say, cat got your tongue.
I mean, it's a massive disconnect, right, between the sheer violence of those images and just the mundane reality of our everyday language.
Right.
Like when we look at an invention, say, the light bulb, we can trace a very clear, documented paper trail right back to Thomas Edison or Joseph Swan. History feels, I don't know, categorized and safe in those instances.
Yeah, you have blueprints and patents and all that.
Exactly. But the moment you step into the world of idioms and everyday speech, that paper trail completely vanishes. We navigate this etymological landscape that is, frankly, entirely murky.
It really is.
We say things every single day without having the faintest idea why those specific words are coming out of our mouths.
Which brings us to the core mission of today's deep dive for you, our listener. We are taking that wildly ubiquitous phrase, cat's got your tongue, and we're putting it under the microscope.
I love this one.
Because if you're a feline lover, you already know this saying has absolutely nothing to do with actual, literal domestic pets attacking our faces.
Right. I mean, a cat might bat at your nose if you're, like, late serving breakfast.
Oh, for sure, they'll let you know. But orchestrating a tactical heist of your vocal organs, it simply isn't a thing.
No, definitely not.
So we are left with this fascinating question. Why on earth do we associate a quiet, sulking person with a domestic animal holding their speech hostage?
Well, to answer that, we really have to look at how the human brain processes the unknown. We abhor a vacuum, and we especially abhor a linguistic one.
Right. We can't just let a mystery be a mystery.
Exactly. When we don't know where a phrase comes from, we don't just shrug and move on. We actively invent these sweeping, dramatic backstories to fill the void.
We love the drama.
We do. So today, we are going to explore 3 of the most popular, globally spanning, and completely wild historical theories that attempt to explain this phrase before uncovering what the actual, verifiable, documented evidence tells us.
And the incredible thing is, examining these fabricated myths tells us just as much about human psychology as the actual truth does.
Oh, without a doubt.
So let's dive right into the deep end with that first image we talked about. If we want to figure out how a cat could supposedly silence someone, let's start with a very literal interpretation, where the cat in question isn't an animal at all.
Right, so we are traveling back to the British Royal Navy during the 19th century.
Okay, setting the scene.
And naval discipline during this era was notoriously brutal. Acts of insubordination, dereliction of duty, or just simple indiscipline, they were met with severe, highly public physical punishment.
And the instrument of choice here is pretty famous, right?
Yes. The instrument of choice for maintaining this terrifying authority was the cat-o'-nine-tails. For those unfamiliar with naval torture devices, this was a fearsome, multi-tailed whip constructed of lengths of knotted cord.
And the sources for this are very clear that these weren't just like standard knots you'd use to tie up a boat.
No, not at all.
They were designed with a very specific, horrific anatomical purpose. When this instrument was struck across a person's back, it wouldn't just leave a bruise. It would literally flay the skin from the body.
It's gruesome.
It was a calculated process of tearing flesh to create a spectacle of ultimate terror.
It was designed to break a person entirely, both physically and psychologically. And according to this specific maritime theory, the sheer blinding agony and trauma of enduring such a beating would leave the victim entirely incapacitated. Following the lashes, the punished sailor would be dragged below decks, completely in shock and utterly quieted by the pain.
Because their brain is literally just short-circuiting from the trauma.
Exactly that. So the theory then suggests that mocking commanding officers or maybe unsympathetic shipmates would look at this traumatized, silent sailor and taunt them, asking, "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue."
Oh.
Yeah, the cat in this context being the bloodied whip that had just beaten them into a state of shocked silence.
Okay, wait, hold on. I mean, I understand dark military humor.
Sure.
I know that people in extreme life or death situations use gallows humor as a coping mechanism, but the trajectory from a flayed back on a 19th century warship to, like, A mom talking to her sulking toddler at the breakfast table.
It's a leap.
That is a massive, illogical leap. Slang absolutely bleeds from the military into civilian life. We see that all the time. But an idiom rooted in agonizing, gruesome physical torture evolving into a lighthearted playground taunt just feels entirely disconnected.
Well, your instinct to reject that leap is exactly why etymologists dismiss this theory outright.
Okay, so they don't buy it either.
Not at all. It relies on a linguistic phenomenon known as folk etymology, combined with a really healthy dose of confirmation bias.
How so?
Well, people have a mystery phrase containing the word cat and the concept of silence, right? So they scan history for anything matching those exact parameters.
Yeah.
They find a historical object called a cat that caused silence, and they just jam the puzzle pieces together. They completely ignore the fact that the emotional resonance of the phrase is entirely wrong.
It's reverse engineering history to fit a punchline. We want a dramatic origin, so we just draft the British Navy to play the starring role. But, if a literal physical punishment like a whip is too disconnected from a household idiom, maybe the answer lies in something that actually invaded the household.
A psychological terror rather than a physical one.
Right. So where does that take us?
That brings us to our second theory, which requires traveling back a few centuries earlier to 16th century England.
Yep.
This was an era where the belief in witchcraft wasn't just some fringe idea. It was prevalent, it was codified in law, and deeply embedded in the everyday, visceral fears of the population.
It was real life to them.
Very much so. And what is crucial for this deep dive is understanding the shifting public relations of the domestic cat during this specific era.
Right, because for a long time prior to this, cats were mostly seen as highly utilitarian.
Yes.
They were respected, or at least tolerated, for their sheer usefulness in controlling rat and mouse populations in grain stores. They were just living, breathing pest control.
They were completely essential for survival in agrarian communities. But in the 16th century, that perception took a dramatic downward turn, particularly for black cats.
Oh, the classic black cat superstition.
Right. They suddenly stopped being seen as helpful rodent hunters and became deeply associated with dark magic and evil doings. They were viewed as familiars.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning demonic spirits operating in animal form, serving witches.
What really fascinates me here is why cats were singled out for this sudden paranoia. Like, why not dogs or sheep or horses?
It's a great question.
The source material points directly to their natural feline behavior. Like, think about how a cat moves. They are incredibly stealthy. They are naturally curious.
Very sneaky.
Yeah. They can slip into a room entirely unnoticed and suddenly materialize on top of a bookshelf.
Oh.
To a highly superstitious 16th century mind, this ability to move without sound made them seem capable of just appearing out of thin air.
Which, if you already believe the world is governed by invisible, dark magic, a creature that defies the laws of physics by moving silently is going to be terrifying.
Absolutely terrifying.
And this fear birthed some truly chilling myths. The most prominent one, which connects to our phrase, is the terrifying belief that these demonic cats would sneak into nurseries, leap into babies' cots, and literally steal the breath right out of the sleeping infants.
Which, if you really picture that scenario, it is straight out of a horror movie.
It's so dark.
It preys on the most primal parental fears imaginable. An invisible monster slipping into your house in the dead of night to steal your child's life force while everyone is completely defenseless.
It was a horrific way for society to explain the unexplainable. Sutter infant death syndrome, which we understand medically today, was a complete mystery back then.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
They needed a culprit for these sudden, tragic losses, so they blamed the silent, stealthy creature lurking in the corner of the room. The witch is familiar.
Wow. So the theory then proposes that stealing the breath somehow morphed into getting the tongue.
That's the idea, yeah.
The logic being that the trauma of the cat attempting to steal the breath results in the child being unable to make a sound.
That is the proposed leap. The child survives, but is struck mute by the demonic encounter. Hence, the cat has their tongue.
I mean, I have to throw another wrench into the gears here. This is a fascinating slice of historical paranoia, but fundamentally, stealing breath is entirely different from stealing a tongue.
Right.
Anatomically, linguistically, metaphorically, they just do not align.
Yeah.
If the historical phrase had been, "Cat's got your breath," I would buy this theory wholeheartedly.
Sure, that would track perfectly.
But the linguistic leap from a suffocating breath stealer to a literal tongue snatcher Feels like another massive, desperate stretch.
It is. It's another textbook example of apophenia, the human tendency to perceive meaningful connections between entirely unrelated things.
It's just human nature.
It is. The folklore of cats stealing breath was absolutely a real documented fear in 16th century England. However, there is zero contemporary textual evidence linking that specific fear to any phrase about a tongue.
Yeah, so they're just forcing it.
Yeah, people are taking a historical myth involving cats and silence and attempting to forcefully stitch it to modern slang. We just crave narrative satisfaction over factual accuracy.
So English history is leaving us with massive logical gaps. The sailors are too gruesome, and the witches are linguistically flawed.
Which leaves us searching again.
Right. If European history is failing us, maybe we need to look at a culture where cats weren't feared as demons, but worshipped as gods, yet where the punishment for speech was still incredibly severe.
Ah, yes. That brings us to our third widely circulated theory. We are leaving Europe entirely, traveling across the world and going much further back in time to ancient Egypt.
Okay, let's hear it.
According to this incredibly popular internet-famous theory, we have to look at the ancient Egyptian justice system. The claim suggests that the judicial consequence for known liars and blasphemers was incredibly specific. Your tongue would be surgically removed.
Which, as brutal as it sounds, was actually a real historical punishment in various ancient cultures for crimes of speech.
It was. It was a literal manifestation of taking away a person's voice.
Right.
But the theory doesn't stop at the amputation. It claims that once the tongue was severed, it would be presented and fed to a cat, or maybe a group of cats.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Since you can no longer speak and the cat literally has your tongue in its stomach, there is your origin story.
See, if you're tracking the logic here, a glaring contradiction pops up right away based on the cultural context.
Big time.
To understand why this theory is so flawed, we really have to look at how the ancient Egyptians actually viewed felines.
Let's talk about it.
The sources provide some incredibly vibrant details. They didn't just tolerate cats, they viewed them as highly sacred beings.
Yeah.
They were living totems of good luck and divine protection.
They were integrated into the highest levels of their spirituality. The reverence was absolute, codified in their religion through the worship of a goddess named Bastet.
Bastet, right.
Yes. Bastet was a female deity, often depicted with the body of a woman and the head of a cat. She was an incredibly important figure in their pantheon, principally associated with the home, fertility, pleasure, and good health.
Which is wild because the sources also mention that wealthy Egyptians would routinely dress their beloved pets in solid gold and precious jewels.
They lived very well.
And when these cats died, they went to the incredible expense and effort to mummify them, preserving them for eternity, just like they would a human pharaoh or noble.
A process that required immense resources, time, and religious devotion.
So here is the glaring issue for me.
Yeah.
You do not take an animal considered a sacred, divine symbol of good health, pleasure, and domestic bliss. An animal you dress in gold and literally mummify and use it as a biological garbage disposal for the bloody, severed tongues of convicted criminals.
No, you definitely don't.
It makes absolutely no sense. You wouldn't feed the refuse of a blasphemer to the earthly representation of your goddess.
It is fundamentally contradictory to everything we understand about their religious practices and concepts of purity.
It really is.
This ancient Egyptian punishment theory reveals our modern desire to exoticize the past. It blends the macabre appeal of ancient justice with the mystique of sacred animals.
Right. It sounds cool.
It sounds like a fantastic pitch for a historical fantasy novel, but the moment you apply even a baseline level of critical thinking regarding their cultural reality, the entire premise just collapses under its own weight.
Okay, so if the British Navy is a stretch, the 16th century witches don't make linguistic sense, and the ancient Egyptian theory is a contradictory internet rumor completely at odds with historical religion. Where does that actually leave us?
Well, all of this skepticism seamlessly transitions us into the actual verifiable historical record, and the documented truth as revealed by etymologists is the ultimate curveball.
I am ready.
Despite how fascinating, dark, and culturally rich those grand narratives are, there is zero credible historical evidence to support a single one of them. The origins of this phrase have nothing to do with pharaohs, witches, or admirals.
So all of that, the knotted whips, the breath-stealing familiars, the severed tongues to Bastet, It is entirely retroactive fiction.
Complete retroactive continuity. It is humanity inventing a dramatic past to explain a mundane present.
Wow.
If we want to know the actual truth, we have to look at when the phrase first appeared in print. The very first documented, verifiable instance of "cat's got your tongue" being used didn't happen in the 16th century or the ancient world. It happened much, much more recently.
When?
December 1859.
1859. I mean, in the grand scheme of human language, that is basically yesterday.
It's remarkably recent. And the location of this first printing is the real twist. It didn't appear in a royal decree, a maritime logbook, or an ancient papyrus scroll. It appeared in a local newspaper.
A newspaper.
Specifically, a publication called the Racine Democrat.
The Racine Democrat.
Yeah.
As in Racine, Wisconsin.
Racine, Wisconsin. When linguists and historians trace the earliest appearances of this saying in print, they don't find it in London or Cairo. The phrase is entirely 100% localized to the United States.
That is an incredible aha moment. And honestly, it is incredibly funny to think about the scale of this historical misdirection.
It really is.
We, as a society, tried so hard to attribute this everyday phrase to the gilded courts of ancient pharaohs and the terrifying decks of naval warships. We desperately wanted this epic, sweeping historical drama, and what we actually got was local, mid-19th century Midwestern American slang.
It is the ultimate historical anticlimax, but it's important to understand why this hyperlocal slang survived and spread.
Right. How did it catch on everywhere?
Well, the 1850s in America was a period of a massive print boom. The proliferation of the penny press and the expansion of telegraph lines meant that local newspapers were everywhere, and they were constantly sharing and reprinting content from each other.
So the whole infrastructure of communication was changing.
Exactly.
Suddenly, a quirky phrase used by a few people in a Wisconsin town could be trapped in ink, printed, and put on a train.
Precisely. It was likely just a folksy, localized idiom, perhaps a nonsense phrase invented by a parent to playfully tease a quiet child that just caught on.
Which makes sense, right?
It got printed in the Racine Democrat in 1859. From there, as populations moved westward and newspapers exchanged columns, it spread across the country and eventually the English-speaking world, entirely shedding its mundane origins along the way.
It's like finding out the deeply mystical artifact you've been worshiping for your entire life was actually manufactured in a factory down the street a few decades ago.
I love that analogy, and it perfectly illustrates the core phenomenon of folk etymology we've been tracking.
Yeah.
When the real origin of something is mundane, just some quirky local slang from Wisconsin that people started repeating, we find that deeply unsatisfying. The human brain rejects the boring truth.
Yeah.
We want the world to be filled with magic, terror, and grand historical stakes.
I want the drama.
Yes. So we invent the British sailors, we invent the demonic familiars, we invent the Egyptian tongue-eaters.
We dress our language up in gold and jewels, just like the ancient Egyptians did with their cats.
That is the perfect way to look at it. We actively mummify our mundane phrases in these elaborate myths to make them feel immortal and important.
Well, this has been an absolute journey. Let's summarize this wild ride for you, our listener. We started by looking at a phrase you use without a second thought, "Cat's got your tongue."
Right.
And to try and find its origins, we traveled through some of the darkest and most dramatic corners of human imagination. We walked the bloody, flayed decks of 19th century British naval ships. We crept through the paranoid, shadow-filled nurseries of 16th century England, looking out for invisible, breath-stealing familiars.
It was quite the trip.
We stood in the incense-filled courts of ancient Egypt, pondering the bizarre, contradictory fate of blasphemers.
A truly epic, completely fabricated itinerary, driven entirely by our refusal to accept a simple answer.
Only to find the actual documented truth sitting quietly, completely devoid of grand drama, in the ink-stained pages of an 1859 Wisconsin newspaper.
And that is the core takeaway for you today. The true, factual origins of our everyday language might be shrouded in doubt, lost to the mundane, unrecorded conversations of history.
Sure.
But the wild, historically elaborate stories we invent to fill those gaps, the apophenia and the folk etymology, they are just as fascinating, and they tell us so much more about the mechanics of human psychology than the boring truth ever could. We are storytelling creatures above all else.
The words in our mouths really are like artifacts, but half the time the mystical dirt we brush off them is just dirt we enthusiastically put there ourselves.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought, something to chew on as you go about your day and send your text messages.
Let's hear it.
Think about the rapidly evolving phrases you use without a second thought. the hyper-specific rapid-fire slang on your phone. If an American newspaper in 1859 is the very first print record of a phrase we now consider to be universally understood, a phrase we now consider to be universally understood, what bizarre slang are you using right now that will completely baffle historians in 150 years, causing them to invent grand ancient myths just to explain it?
I can only imagine the cinematic backstories they are going to invent for the way we speak today.
It's going to be a wild historical fiction. Thanks for diving deep with us today.